person, if you could tell us your name.
It's all good, man.
Oh, my name is Bob Lewis, and I work in the VSS department part-time.
Thank you. All right, I'll turn it over to Dr.
So, we are done with the introductions, but I want to add two things. Lisa has always been very supportive, and you have to know how busy she is, but she made time for this workshop because I believe she really, really wants to do everything she can to support you in your effort to apply for a full-time position. And so, at Dean Murakami, it's again here for the same reason, and I want to really thank him for this. We will start with the overview of the hiring process, and the expert on this is, of course, our Vice President, Lisa Lawrenson. So everyone, please give Lisa a hand.
I'm going to stand up for a bit. That is the teacher in me. I can't help myself. But I will tell you, I slipped in the administration building and twisted my ankle. So I'll stand up as long as I can, then I'll have to sit down probably this way. I camouflaged it well, so you can't tell too much. But anyhow, welcome. It's good to see all of you. And I thought it would be helpful for you to know kind of what's behind the process. Where do the positions come from? How, which departments come forward? How are those selected? How does that work at the district level? You just heard that we're going to get an allocation at the district level. So what does that translate into for the college? So I'm going to explain that process because I think it might be helpful for you, as well as share some other tips and experiences. And just to give you a sense, I've been an administrator here at ARC for the past 13 years. I went to preschool at ARC and I was a student here in the 80s as well. And I like to tell everybody that because I'm proud of that. So I'm proud of my mom for coming to this campus, and also it was a great campus for me as a student. So I really believe in the mission that we are here to serve our students, and a big part of that is the faculty. Each and every faculty member that we have, you're changing lives every single day. And so I think it's really critical that we have a clear process and try to help you as well in your own career search and give you the opportunity to serve students the best that you can. So let's see. The other thing I wanted to mention is in my role as Vice President and Associate Vice President, I've chaired literally, I can't even count how many committees, hundreds of them. So that would be for the full-time faculty, for administrative hires. And as Vice President of Instruction, I sit in on all of the second round. So it's Thomas, myself, and the Dean of the area that interview candidates at the second level. So I'll talk to you a bit about what that experience is like if you have not been in one of those yet, because I think it's helpful. When I came for my second round interview here, somebody told me, I think the person who scheduled it said, "This is a casual conversation." And the minute I walked in that room, I thought, this is not casual at all. So you might hear something like that. Just know that it's a competition and it is not casual. I did get the job, so lucky for me, but meaning I was worried about that communication. Oh, it's just a casual, leisurely conversation. It isn't. It's an interview. There are questions, and it's still a competition. So just in case you're wondering about that, but we'll talk about that later. So let's back up for a moment. So you heard that we have an allocation at the district level, and what happens next, the very first step is that the Academic Senate announces to the departments, and I announce to the deans, that it's time for the faculty positions to be put forward. So department chairs make those recommendations to their deans, and then those recommendations come forward to me. And I just received those last week. So at the moment, we have a request for 19 faculty positions at ARC. Last year, we hired, I think I got 17 or 18, something like that. I can't quite recall the number. I know I had 22 committees in the spring that we were hiring for faculty and admin. So anyhow, we currently have 19. So the next step in that process is that goes to our research office, and they do a little bit of number crunching, but then they send it back to the divisions to get information to calculate what's called the 75-25. What is that? What do those numbers mean, 75-25? Anybody know?
That's FT full-time versus part-time ratio.
Correct.
Something like that.
And so when AB 1725 passed, basically the 75-25 rule was put into effect, which is that the goal for community colleges is to have 75% of the FTE taught by full-time faculty members. I want to underscore to you how great that is. I taught in Washington State as a full-time faculty member. Guess what that ratio was there? Just take a guess.
25-75.
It was 90% adjunct, 10% full-time. Okay? And I like to share that with people in California because if you think it's tough going from adjunct to full-time here, it's nearly impossible in many other states. And so I was a fortunate person in that I did get a full-time position, but I remember hearing from others that if you were ever an adjunct, it's like you were marked for life and you'd never become a full-timer. And that is not the case here in Los Rios and not in our district. So I just want to underscore how great having the 75-25 rule is. So that's a goal that we're shooting for. So what happens with the data is that the departments will get the information that shows their 75-25 calculation. That helps them in competing for positions at the Senate level and at the dean level, because they're going to come forward and present their best case for why they need the position. And there are two types of position. There are growth positions, which means that it's not a replacement position, it's a new position, or a replacement position. But let's say person X retired 2 years ago, and at that time maybe enrollment was down and the department decided they didn't want to go for a position at that time. But 2 years later they decide, well, we really do need that position, we're going to go back. That's now considered a growth position, even though it's really a replacement position. So that gets a little confusing sometimes, I think, for people. So I just want you to understand, if it's not requested the year after somebody retires, it becomes a growth position. But we have a few of those right now that are actually kind of filling in for maybe 2 or 3 years ago when people retire. Yes?
Question, the 75-25 rule applies to the entire campus?
It applies to every California community college.
Yes.
And then the way that plays out in our process is that we're looking at the division level, at the department level.
Okay, so within a department, then the goal is also 75-25?
Right, and that's a minimum standard.
Okay.
So it's okay to exceed that standard, but let's say that one department, maybe their ratio is, I don't know, 51-49, and another department is 80-20.
Yeah.
You can see why then the urgency becomes we need to do something about helping that ratio out for that other department, and that becomes a higher priority. There are other factors as well, but that is one of the calculations that's looked at here by the departments, by the deans, and by the district. Okay? So then those positions go forward to the academic senate and faculty present, usually the department chair, about why they need that position. And they'll talk about what's happening in their department, why it's critical for them. Meanwhile, in area deans, the deans present that information for the positions in their areas. So the faculty then do their rankings and they vote on the positions, and they rank them from 1 to 19. But they do that separately from the deans, who do the same process these are all confidential votes. Those two lists then go forward to the college president, who sees the Senate's list and the area dean's list. And from that list, the final list is compiled. And my experience has been with Thomas and also with several presidents prior, interim and permanent ones, they try their best to honor what the faculty are bringing forward from the Senate. That's usually the goal. There might be an occasional, like this one's really more critical than people understand or something like that that we bring forward from the administration, but we create a combined list. But I do want you to know that the faculty vote there is very strong in that combination. So that final list then is given to me, and as Vice President of Instruction, I have to then go to the district office and compete with the other 3 VPIs for the allocation across the district. And they give us a number which will tell us this is how many replacement positions you have, and this is what we think that you can have for growth. So they'll give me a target number, and so far, in the last 2 years that I've competed, I was able to get us an additional position on top of the number they gave us. So that's good. That meant that somebody else had to give theirs up. But I would only do that if I really was weighing out this position is really more critical than that one at another campus. I don't want to take something from another campus in our own district when it's something critical for them. So that's a negotiation process that happens at district. And at that time, We look at all options, including can we pay for a position out of strong workforce, so we can have yet another position. We look at, which we want to bring in as many faculty as we possibly can, based on our funding. So that's the process. Then the positions are determined at that time, and then we immediately advertise them. We go through a process of working on the job descriptions with the departments, and we begin assigning the committees early in January. So that's the beginning of that whole process. So all of that takes place before you ever see an announcement come out. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. Yes?
Hi, just a quick question. On the 75-25, what if you have long-term temps? Are they in the 75 or the 25?
The LTTs are, I believe they're not counted in that. I don't have that memorized off the top of my head. Can't remember if they are or not. Do you know any? No temporaries? Okay. Yeah, so that's not counted in that ratio.
So they're
Also,
not, they're
overload
not
is,
counted at all, or are they not counted as full-time?
they're not counted in the full-time portion of that ratio.
So then that would be the 20.
Yeah, and actually, there's a sheet that your dean will get that actually explains, because I have all those categories laid out in a chart that I worked with Chris Olson on, so that all the deans know exactly what's counted and what's not counted, because it's kind of confusing, you know, for overload and all, you know, all the different issues we have going on. We want to make sure that they're, but it's really just being in compliance with Title V. It'll tell us right there exactly what's counted and what isn't. So then at that point, do you want me to continue on, Ornit, with what happens at that point? Okay, so the next thing that happens is I then assign committee chairs to the committees as vice president. And currently our 3 associate vice presidents, that's Kate Jakewees, Frank Kobayashi, and Colleague Braden, serve as the chairs of those committees. And student services will have often a dean chair their committees for counseling, so that's separate. So we ask for appointments from the academic senate and from the classified senate. And for faculty hiring, the committee will be made up primarily of faculty. They need to be in the majority on the committee. When it's an administrative position, then the majority of the committee would be administration, and the same is true for classified. But for the faculty positions, it will be predominantly faculty. And it's full-time faculty who serve on those committees, typically. On occasion, sometimes there's adjuncts, but that's pretty rare. It's usually full-time faculty members. Then what happens is, once all the appointments are set by the Senate, the committee is called forward and they meet for their first meeting, and they do several things in that meeting. One is they talk about the interest they have in the position. So they might say things like, we really want somebody who can teach all levels of mathematics, or we want somebody who can focus on this particular aspect of diesel. So it's to kind of target that area. If it's ESL, it might be we need somebody who can teach the reading and the speaking and listening strands or whatever. So that those interests are written down, and then all the committees, based on the job description, come up with criteria by which to screen the applications. They do not have the applications at that time. They do not see the applications until all the criteria and the questions are written. That part happens first, and then the applications are viewed. So why would that be? Why wouldn't you get to see the applications and then create the questions?
So they don't get biased.
So you don't get biased. You don't start writing questions for a specific candidate, right? Or against a specific candidate. So that's kept completely separate, and that's a very strict process. Until it's all signed off and delivered, it's actually controlled at high levels before those committees can be revealed even to the chair. They have to submit all of their paperwork first. And I think that's a good process in order to protect everybody in it. The questions have to be based on the job description as much as possible, but those sometimes can go beyond the job description. But the screening criteria have to be based on the job description. And why is that?
Because that's what's listed, advertised?
Exactly. So if in the job description it doesn't say we want someone with an emphasis on statistics, maybe they have it, but they didn't see it in the job description, so they didn't write it down in their letter. Maybe it's not included in their paperwork. So we can only ask for things that are evident in the job description. And that's important for you to know because you're getting screened based on your paperwork. Your paperwork should be addressing what's in the job description. I think that would be true pretty much for any job, but particularly in Los Rios, that's going to be true of all of the colleges. So you want to make sure that you're really paying close attention to what's asked for in the job description. Does that make sense? Okay. Then the questions, I know that Ornette has, you provided this for them already, right?
Yes.
So you have a list of some sample questions here. I do want to say that when it comes to the questions that the committees, I like the committees to create fresh questions, not reuse old questions for a variety of reasons. So I encourage the chairs to make the committees make up new questions because things change in a department from year to year, what's needed. And I also think that if somebody's interviewed previously, that could be an advantage or a disadvantage. It could be both, depending on if you've heard the question before. Other than the obvious question of, please tell us how you're qualified for this position, which you should be expecting as a candidate, as the very first question, right? So then all the questions are created, and at that point, we go through the screening process. So it's now, let's say we've created all our questions, we've created all of our screening criteria, they've all been approved. The committee gets the application materials. At that point, they will individually screen the application materials, and each individual will independently rank the applications. So there'll be like an automatic scoring spreadsheet. So they fill out all the criteria for each one, give you points based on your application, and then whatever the people are who earn the highest numbers, those are the top 10 or 15 that get invited in. So that's done collectively. What happens on a committee is that, let's say we're the committee, the four of us, and I'm chairing it. They don't know how each person tallied it up. Only the chair knows and the equity representative, nobody else. So that way Craig has no idea what TAC did and so on. Because we don't want kind of this, group voting mentality of, oh, well, Dean voted for this person, so I better do that too. It's very individual. So then, based on the scoring, it's determined who will come in. That will be 10 or 15 roughly. Depends on the position, it depends on how big the pool is. For a pool in English, it can be as large as 200. For a pool in nursing, it could be as small as 4. So it really can vary based on the discipline, and that makes a difference in terms of the process. Because if you have 4 applicants, they all seem decent, you're going to invite the 4 in, right? That makes sense. The committee makes that decision, but it would be likely that that would happen. When you have 200, you can't invite in the top 50. You're going to be there for weeks if you do that. So you've got to narrow it down to the top 10 or 15. But usually the larger pools like mathematics and English will interview more people. District also has a process by which they're looking at the diversity of the pool based on racial diversity. And as of late in particular, they have been sending pools back saying that the pool is not diverse enough. You have to understand from the screener's point of view, we have no idea who the candidates are. We're looking at paperwork, so unless a person reveals anything personal about themselves, we have no idea. You can't tell by a name, you can't tell by the application, as it should be. So from what happens is district may come back and say, well, you need to interview the top 18 according to your numbers, because then the pool will have more diversity in it. So this has become kind of a new aspect that we've been handling, I would say, in terms of interviewing. And I don't want to go too much down that road, but the intention of the district is to have the pools be as diverse as possible. And I'm all for diversity and equity. Those of you who know me know that I'm very dedicated to those issues, so I want to be clear. I'm not saying I'm not in favor of that. The question is that really going to produce what they need? And we're really looking at the hiring process at the district level, so I would expect there to be changes to the process in the future. But I'm just telling you what the process is right now. So anyhow, once the folks are selected to come in for interviews, then you would receive a notification, usually by phone, and then it will be frequently be followed, it should be followed by written materials saying to you when your interview is, where it is, what time it is, and then exactly what's required, which is usually a teaching demonstration of some kind, which is typically 10 to 15 minutes. And then you get to come in on your day and you'll do a writing sample, which can range anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, and then go in for the interview, which is typically 50 minutes long, usually with 10 questions, just to give you a sense of that. You will be told in that paperwork how long the interview is. You won't be told how many questions, but you'll know what your timing is from the get-go. So then it starts to come down to how do you prepare for the interview. And I'll just speak briefly to that. I know I have to watch my time, and I'm not trying to hog up all the airtime, but I do have to leave, so I want to make sure that I can say a few things that are critical for you. When you prepare your teaching demo, you may be asked to describe a huge topic. It's possible, you know. I don't know, I'm trying to think what's seeing, you know, deconstruct, you know, this particular passage of this text, you know, and you have 10 minutes. It's nearly impossible, and you're trying to demonstrate your style, you're trying to do a whole bunch of things. Please know that the committee is not expecting you to get from the beginning to the end in that 10 minutes. They're looking for a sampling of what you can do. So it's okay to say something like this. Earlier, we were in small groups, and you all determined that these were the top 3 themes. And then you have maybe some question and answer, and you can say, now we're going to go and do something else. You can kind of lay out a little bit of your lesson plan of how you would run a class. That's a technique I've seen people do successfully. Whatever you do, you want it to be representative. I would definitely stand up. I think sitting down is a mistake when you're teaching because it seems so unnatural to be sitting down. And I've noticed on committees, when somebody doesn't stand up, I don't think that counts in the person's favor. It will feel awkward. You're in a boardroom or a long table. It's anything but like a classroom. But I'd really recommend standing up because the committee can see you, they can hear you better, and you just have to pretend it's your classroom the absolute best that you can and treat the committee like your class, which will seem odd to you because you're going to have experts in the field. But just know that they will play the role of students, or they'll tell you what role they're playing, and it's usually that we are your students. So rather than say things like, when I'm teaching, I would do this. Don't do that, just teach. Just pretend they're in your class and do it. I know it feels awkward, but that's what they're expecting, is to see that. And it's also critical that you really, if you're a person who your style is very collaborative, if you really want to do student-directed learning, whatever it is, have that demo represent your style. Because that's the impression they're going to be left with. They're going to say, wow, this person's really interactive, or this person's a sage on the stage, or this person, because that's all they're going to see of you. And even if they know you and have seen you teach, they can't bring that into the process. So sometimes that's difficult when you know somebody's very, let's say, a very animated teacher, very interactive. Sometimes in a demo, they might be flat. And so I might be thinking, oh, I know this person's really, really dynamic, but it didn't come off that way in the interview. I would also practice your demo in front of an audience. If you have a mentor, if you're at another campus and you're applying for a job here, ask somebody, ask the department chair, you know, lean on your faculty colleagues, lean on faculty in another department. It doesn't have to be your department to get some feedback on your demo. It's not something you should do at the last minute, it's something you want to plan out and be well prepared, and have backup materials. You know, if you're working on a flash drive, bring 2 of them. You know, have a backup somewhere. I've seen so many technological problems come up. I would have printed out copies of your PowerPoint in case one of the power goes out. Lots of things can happen just like the classroom, so be prepared. Because it's impressive to the committee when something goes wrong that you don't miss a beat. Because that tells us in the classroom, if something goes wrong, you're going to keep teaching and you know how to do that. So you don't want to get flustered by a small problem, but things do happen. I've seen fire alarms go off during interviews. I've seen all kinds of things occur. So be prepared, that way you're secure that you're ready to deliver. Yes?
If you're a Mac user or if you're a PC user, you might want to also be prepared that things might not show up right, the way you see things on the screen, or how you operate the computer might be a little different. So just be prepared.
And if you have questions about that, you can call the administrative assistant that called you for the interview and ask questions. You know, what kind of material? When I would send information out, I would tell them exactly what equipment would be available. And that's usually what we do, but if that's not the case and you have questions, ask. You know, better to be prepared. Yes?
Outside of the teaching demo, when I went through the process before, I was least prepared for the writing sample process. Can you address that, please, and give advice on preparation?
I think the preparation is that just you need to be prepared to complete one and not panic, because it feels awful having 20 minutes to sit there and do that. And I'm a writing person, so it made me frantic as well. It can feel like you're under a lot of pressure. I will tell you, different departments look for different things. In the English department, if your writing sample isn't perfect, you will get chewed alive. There's just no question about it, because English teachers are looking for somebody who has writing expertise. And if you can't gauge your time and review it, then it will count against you. I've seen other departments where writing's important but isn't their mainstead. They're really looking for what the content is. Some departments will ask questions like, what's your what's your vision for this department? Or tell us ways that you would collaborate with your colleagues in this department. What kinds of questions have you guys asked?
We're not real, I teach in the tech ed department, and if you spell a word, we're good. Most of us wouldn't know it anyhow. And we're looking more for content. We're looking for you an understanding of the content of the subject. If it's electronics, we want you to know Ohm's law. We want to know the basics. And you could even graft it out more good. In each department, I've done interviews in most of the departments here, and each one has its own flavor. We're looking to, at least talk collaborative. You come back as a collaborative person, the way you present yourself, you ask questions, and some of the things that Lisa talked about in terms of this is your chance to come across. I've seen some excellent teachers freeze, and they just freeze because they know everybody in there and they're worried about what they're saying. And then I've seen others that, wow, where did that come from? They just did a fantastic job. This is your chance to shine. You only have this opportunity, and it's as if we didn't know you from before. We can only go by what you're showing us at that point in time.
I would also say that the committee is expecting 20 or 30 minutes of writing. They're not expecting a dissertation. They recognize that you're on a time limit. English will usually give 30 minutes. ESL will often give 30 minutes. Different departments put a different value on that writing sample. So it really depends. I would say another way to practice is just take some writing prompts and do timed writing at 20 or 30 minutes. I mean, that's a way just to get yourself in the mindset, especially if writing isn't your favorite activity. That might be a way just to get you thinking in that way. Yes?
And for ESL, I think it depends on the committee, but there are times that we just say we want to know if you can communicate well, and we don't really worry too much about the content. Lee, what's your
No, well,
experience?
I think for us it is what can you communicate well. You know, writing is a part of our job.
Mm-hmm.
And you're on committees and everything else. There's a lot of writing involved. We need people who can write, and we got to make sure that that is true. I'd say at the very bottom line, at the very end, it's unfortunate that so many people don't use spell checker, and there are grammar and spelling errors throughout the papers. They're just writing so fast. So you got to take the time to use spell checker, grammar checker, and get it all cleaned up at the end.
And in computer information science, at least for the past 3 years, I've been on a hiring committee for 3 consecutive years. No, it is not a good thing. It takes a lot of time. So what we look for, is a little bit different. I think we look at writing as a communication, means of communication, but we also try to look at how the person thinks. And in computer science, we ask questions that are a little bit more, I guess, technologically oriented. So we'll ask questions like, what do you foresee is going to be the next quote-unquote big thing, okay, in the next 5, 10 years. So we want to see, what the person knows about what is coming, what is currently on the horizon, and how that is going to impact classes in computer science. So that's just specifically what you look for, in certain types of writing samples.
Yeah, so as you see, it can really vary quite a bit. Some departments will say, here's a sample email you got from a student, write a response to the student. Or they might have you evaluate a paper. Maybe a colleague says, hey, I got this paper from the student. Can you look at it and give me your opinion? So just try to contextualize what the question is, but it could range in any of those types of areas. And with the questions, the good news is you can pretty much gauge what 3 of the questions will be of the 10 before you even get there. The first one is, who are you and why do you want this position? And what I would recommend is you should definitely practice that answer before you go in the interview. I've heard candidates take as long as 25, 30 minutes on the first question in a 50-minute interview. And that's a mistake. And I'm just saying that because you don't have to say it all in the first question. So you want to summarize your experience. You don't have to talk about every grade that you received and every course you took, but give us a general sense of how that experience has brought you here and how you're prepared. Don't forget to talk about your teaching experience. I've had teachers come in and answer that question and not ever mention that they taught at AR, and I know they've been adjunct here for 8 years. It's important that you tell us that. even if you know most of the committee. When you walk in, you have to absolutely act like this is a group of strangers you have never met before, and bring all of your best stuff. Because if you don't say it in that room, they can't give you points for it. So avoid things like, well, you know, Jack, you know how I teach. Can't do that. So they are going to treat you as if they've never seen you before, and you need to say everything in the interview that's part of your experience so they can give you points for that. Another question that will definitely be asked and is required is a question on equity and diversity. Those can range in how do you meet the needs of diverse students, to what's your definition of equity, to a variety of other things, but there'll be some type of question on equity and diversity. And the last question is usually something like, do you have any questions that you would like to ask the committee? Is there anything else you want to let us know that we didn't get a chance to talk about? Something like that. Some committees score that question and some don't. But I would definitely come in with something to say, something to ask. And I'll turn it to you guys. What do you think are good responses for those questions? So do you have any questions for the committee?
Yeah. Is there anything that I missed out that you would like to know more about? Is there anything that you would like to know about me? There are certain things that you don't want to ask. I had one person in one interview ask me two things. One is, how much do I get paid? It's not a question you should ask at the end. The other one, is this a full-time or part-time job? I was looking at it, like, what, are you kidding me? Those were not good. That just sucked his interview. Those people's interviews right down the toilet. That was it. They knew that you didn't understand what was going on.
And do your homework. I would add into that. Do you guys offer a course in this? I'm thinking, didn't you look at the catalog to see what we offer? I mean, you know, so you want to do your homework. And I would say even in departments you teach in here, you might be teaching 2 or 3 courses, and there might be 30 courses in the catalog in that department that you might be asked to teach. So know the curriculum the best that you can, and know about what the department's involved in. You can go to the catalog, you can go to the website, but do your homework.
Yeah, talk to your colleagues. I mean, you want to know, where does this department want to go in the future? Where is it trying to move as a whole in terms of development of the, you know, this is the reality, is that there are a lot of people that can teach the classes that we're going to offer. I mean, there are a lot of qualified candidates for teaching. But the key question is going to be, what do you bring beyond that? Are you just going to be here to teach your classes and you go home? Is that the kind of faculty member that you're going to be? Or are you going to be here, someone who's going to be involved in the department, involved in its development, involved in shared governance, and the governance of the college? Those are the kind of colleagues that we need. And those are things you have to get across to the committee, that that's your commitment to your profession and to this college. Because otherwise, yeah, I mean, we can get anybody in. That's just the reality. We want someone that is going to bring us forward and move us forward.
And even if you haven't had the opportunity to be involved, you can talk about things that you would like to be involved in. I mean, we like hearing that as well. If maybe you haven't had the opportunity to serve on curriculum, but you're very interested in serving on the committee, that's a good thing to bring forward.
I just helped someone prepare for an interview, I would say about a month ago. And because these 2 questions are always going to be there, so these are the 2 questions that you have the most time to prepare for, like from now. As soon as you walk out of here, think about it. Now what really helps is for your closing statement or the closing question to echo what you use for the opening. If those 2 connect, then you will leave a stronger impression with the panel, or with the committee. And if you start with something that's memorable, that really set you apart from the rest, and you close with something that relates to how you open, that will leave an even stronger impression. And because you already know these questions are going to be asked, or you have to address these 2 questions, so you have a lot of time to really think about what makes you stand out or what makes you different from the other candidates. It doesn't have to be competitive. It doesn't have to be something that you are better than the other ones. It's just something that you can distinguish yourself so that the committee can remember you better compared to the rest. It can be something that's that doesn't seem to be competitive, like an experience, And, as long as it relates to the position that you're applying to, it will still count.
And be yourself, because if you're not authentic, it shows. So rather than trying to act like somebody you think they want, be you. Nobody can be you better than you, and it really comes across in an interview if you're being truly who you are. Express what your passions are about teaching, about being involved in a community college. Any of those aspects are very important, your passion for students. Those things need to come across, and I think sometimes people might be a little afraid to actually be who they are, but that's what makes you unique, and it really stands out when you do bring your whole self into the room. So I would definitely recommend that. And the other side of that is, if you don't do that and you're trying to kind of play a part, you may end up in a department that you don't want to be in, because then they just hired this person, this actor who's not really you. So just be you, be your earnest self, because then if you are hired, you know that they've taken you as you are. They're inviting you into their department being you. And I think that's a really important thing, because it's not just about getting the job. It's about earning tenure, and it's also about having a career that's fulfilling to you in a department that's meaningful for you. Because it's not just about teaching, it's also about your academic life and your life with our students at this particular institution at this particular time.
So, I do want to emphasize that first question that everybody gets. You know you're going to get it. We screen through a lot of paperwork for a lot of people, but this first question provides a context of that material, what we know about you. There's lots of things that we don't, and this is what allows you to fill that in. You get a broader picture of you. The other part of it is that this is, when you answer that question, that's the first impression this committee is going to have of you. So if you give a 2-minute answer that is so unfulfilling, the rest of the interview is going to go exactly the same way, because they've established this is who you are. You're not well prepared, you don't have a real interest, and so why are we going to invest the time in you? If you run on too long, that's also a bad thing. We want to make sure, again, that first impression, you want to make it very, very positive, very, very positive, because that sets the tone for the entire interview. And we've had too many people that we've known really well that just mess up on that one, and the whole interview goes downhill from there. That's the unfortunate thing. Even though we know that person much, much better than what they're demonstrating, it's unfortunate that they really miss out. That first question is so important. Please make sure that you've got that down cold. A lot of people, they just don't. They're trying to think about it on the fly, and it just does not go well. They know that we know that you're not well prepared for what you're supposed to do.
So just to clarify, that first question is, who are you, or is why did you be here?
What makes you qualified to be for the job? Who are you? Give us some background. You want to start to give more background about yourself. I would say, and in terms of diversity, what you don't want to do is limit diversity just to the questions about diversity. You want to say, yeah, and in my background, one of the interesting ones that I purposely went to Iran to see what that culture was like. I spent 6 months there learning about the culture and then bringing it back to closer. That was just a very interesting, not critical, but it's something that gives us additional context to who and what this person is. But that's really important that you have a diverse look that you've incorporated there. You incorporate diversity in terms of your lecture, the lecture thing that you want to do. Okay, you can incorporate it in there. You can find ways, if you think about it, to incorporate diversity into many parts of the interview. And that's what you need to do to demonstrate that you have a true understanding about diversity. Not just that I have a canned answer to the question, the single question that we might ask about.
I've seen where we've taken technical questions and an individual didn't know the second question at all. They just said, I'm not familiar with that. And you would think you were sunk at that point. Not necessarily. You move on from there and go to the next question as if you're starting at that point. And then and I know it sits in your mind where you're going through the interview. Is anybody where they've said yes? Just keeps playing there. And then you realize, oh, okay, I know where we're at. When you get to that final question, there's your chance to sort of correct that. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the committee? Yes. Well, I was confused by sometimes what teaching demos, the way this hydraulic piece of equipment worked. I thought it was along this way, explain the process at that point. So the committee knows you really knew what the answer was, you just didn't know the way it was being presented at that time. And then a lot of this comes back to personality. You can answer a question flat, and it's going to stay flat. But if you can be personable, we have an opportunity to go to Cuba now as instructors. And maybe one of the things you talk about is, you know, I have an opportunity to go to Cuba, and the reason that I'm doing this is the opportunity to see other cultures. I like old cars, got a lot of old cars there. And you can bring it into whatever you're interviewing on. And keep in mind too that, for instance, I'm in tech ed, it's not gonna be all tech ed folks there. You're gonna have English, you're gonna have math, you're gonna have all different personalities. And a lot of times the assumption would be when you're coming into these, that everybody knows everything. So break it down that if somebody didn't know what the question was, maybe restate the question, explain it as you're going, as if somebody didn't understand. And that helps, because other people in the committee go, hey, you know what? I didn't know what the question meant, but when they were explaining it to me like a student, I had a really good understanding of what was being asked and how that relates to the way it was being asked. So,
I would say, you're going to have all the questions in front of you, right? You'll have all 10 questions in front of you. And the advantage of being really prepared, like when I did my interview many, many, many years ago, okay, at least 6 of the questions I knew. I just knew, I was prepared for those. Those I knew. But some of the others I was not too sure about. I was oh my God, what about that? But what that allowed me to do is I could give my answers to the questions and at the same time start thinking about and formulate what I was going to say about the one that I didn't quite know as well. Well, if you're not prepared on these other questions, you're not going to be able to get to that into your thought until you get to that question. That was the advantage of finally. A little thing hit me on that question that I was not too sure about. And I was able to put a pretty good answer together. But I would not have been able to do that if I was struggling on all these other questions without preparation. I knew them, I knew almost by heart what I was going to say, because I just knew what it was, knew those questions ahead of time, some version of it.
And just a couple of other quick things that I always recommend to folks, before you go into an interview, just read over your CV real quick. Because, at least for me, I'm lucky, I get really nervous right before an interview, but then I'm calm during it. Some people get the opposite. Whatever it is, it's a nerve-wracking experience. I like to do that because I'll forget things. And there might be a question that's asked about that, but it kind of keeps me focused on, what experience do I have? What have I done? What's prepared me? And it's just like your quick clip notes on yourself. Right? And that way, if they're asking you things, you might be sparked by something that you did 10 years ago that you've forgotten about. Wow, you really, you were the editor of this journal, but you'd forgotten about it because it's way back there, but now you're applying for a job where they have a journal and something relevant. So that's just a quick thing that I would suggest. I do want to talk about what happens after the interview, and then you guys can go back, because I know I have to go soon. I want to make sure I talk about second round. So once all the interviews have taken place, the committee then, again, individually ranks the candidates. Those scores are not public. They're only the chair and the equity rep have them. And then the top, I didn't bring that part in the contract, it's the top 5, is it 5 for faculty? So anyway, the top 5 are listed on the board in alphabetical order. So nobody knows who was first place, second place, and so on. And the strengths and weaknesses of those 5 candidates are discussed as a committee. And so at that point, the other 5 or 10 that didn't get called forward are not discussed at all. So it's only the top people. Then those faculty, the whole committee re-ranks, because what might have happened is maybe a candidate said, I really don't like working with students. And Dean heard that, but I didn't because I was busy doing something else. He goes, yeah, I couldn't believe that person said I don't like working with students. And I'm like, oh, they did? And I have them ranked number 1. This might change my mind going, oh, I think maybe they're number 5 now. So anyway, they get re-ranked, and that final listing is what determines who goes on to the second round. It can be based on scores. There are lots of things that go into that process. In some cases, there might be a huge gap between the top 3 or 4 and number 5, so maybe 4 go forward. There are lots of negotiations that happen between the chair and the group. But once that final grouping is sent forward, then I go in there along with Thomas, our president, and we debrief with the committee to hear about the strengths and weaknesses from the committee themselves. That helps us to shape our questions for the second round. They might say things like, none of the candidates really covered the issue of working with diverse students, and we'd like you to ask more about that. Or we didn't ask a good question on being a good department colleague. Can you explore that a little more? Or we have concerns that nobody's prepared to teach the lower levels of mathematics. Can you ask more about that? So whatever the committee determines, we ask those questions. It helps shape the second round questions. They might say for candidate X, we need to know more about that person's, I don't know, the different strands they teach in ESL. We didn't hear much about that. But maybe they know that for the other candidates. So not everybody gets the same questions in the second round. That's one thing I want you to know. Then you get called in for the second round. That could take place anywhere from a day or two to a week later. It just depends. And this is the part where they might say to you, oh, you just come in, it's more, I think they say it's more casual. It really isn't casual. I mean, dress like you're going to an interview and be prepared to be interviewed, because that's what's going to happen. You'll be at a small table with 3 people, so that feels more intimate. The good thing is, unlike our regular interview process, you can't ask questions about the questions, right? You can't say, what do you mean by whatever word or whatever question? You can't ask for clarification. In the second round, it's more conversational. So you might be able to say, well, did I give you enough background on, was that enough about my teaching background, or would you like to hear more about what I did in K-12? I mean, you can say things like that. Or we can say, if you didn't answer the question, and we do have candidates sometimes that don't answer the question, we'll ask it 2, 3, 4 different ways until we get the answer. So unlike the first round where it would just sit there, and if you didn't really answer the question, it goes away, our job is to dig in and find out all the information that we can to help make a decision. So we're really doing our best to hear as much as possible about you during that time. Those interviews last typically 40 minutes, so it's a little bit quicker. They're usually somewhere between 8 and 10 questions, and they really, really vary. They're usually questions, though, one way to prepare is they may be related to the questions that you got in the first round. So that's something to be prepared for. I would say, additionally, in the second round, this is something that's very important. I've worked with so many folks. By the time you get to the second round, you may have beat out, 80 people to be down to the top 3. And typically, the top candidates are all outstanding. It's not a matter of 1 great person and 2 not so good. We're a very strong college, and we have really strong applicants. So if you do go to second round and you don't get the position, I know for some people that feels like you failed. I will have people say, how did I fail? What did I do wrong? And it's like the person didn't do anything wrong. It may be that, I always like to use ESL as an example, perhaps somebody had experience in teaching ESL writing, but they really needed somebody with speaking and listening. And the other candidate had that and you didn't. It's decisions like that get made. It might be that they need an organic chemist and you're an inorganic specialist, things like that. So I would say if you make it to second round, that tells you something. It tells you that your paperwork's strong and your interviewing skills are strong. I'm trying to think of in second round if I've ever seen somebody bomb second round. I really haven't. It's hard to bomb the interview at that point. You're bringing what you have, just bring what you have. It's a different situation, so it's not really because of somebody not doing well. There are a lot of factors involved in making those decisions, and I cannot tell you how hard it is for me. I have to make all the calls to the candidates who get the jobs and the candidates who do not get the jobs, every single one of them. So it's really hard, because in some cases I just want to say, you were outstanding, you're so close, like you're paper width away from getting it, and the person on the other end feels so dejected, like they don't ever want to go for another job again. And I will tell people, if there's another job, please apply. You're very reachable, don't give up. And so I say that to you is, I can think of a particular professor that I've hired the last few years who was adjunct for quite a while, who I know I interviewed that person probably 8 different times, but then got the job. So you can't give up, is what I'm saying. I know it's frustrating when you're on the other end of that, but it doesn't mean that you won't get the job. If you don't get it, it's not a rejection of you. So I wanted to say that about second round. I think that's really important for you to hear and to not get discouraged.
I'd just like to say that this is the reason why at the end of your interview, the first interview, what you really have to do is sit down and think about what went well, what did not go well. Because those things that didn't go especially well, that's what they're going to ask in the second interview. So you better know what didn't go well, honest evaluation, and then shore that up and get prepared to answer that adequately. And it's also a time when you should really, if you said, well, gee, I know I had a lot of experience in that they just didn't understand, then what you need to do is get to your references and say, hey, they really need to know this better about me. You know that really well. Please emphasize that if they ever contact you. Those are the kinds of things you have to follow up on after the interview. Take an honest evaluation and move forward on those issues.
I am going to need to go. I just want to say one last thing, and that is, I wish you great luck out there in the process. I hope to see you somewhere in the second round. Like I said, be prepared, be yourself, and be confident. Be confident. If you've been invited for an interview, you've already won. You have beat out so many people to have that opportunity to interview. And you don't need to apologize for, I see people sometimes who are very overly modest. It's not a time to be modest. It's a time to toot your own horn. And if that's not your personality or your culture, that can be awkward. And what I would say is that's something then you want to practice, ways to do that that might feel appropriate for you. But if you don't bring the information forward, we're not going to know. And so that's really critical. So I do want to say I wish you great success in the process. And again, you've got your great colleagues here. Rely on your colleagues. Your union's here to support you. And I wish you well. I'm sorry that I have to leave, but I do. So
I'm sure Lisa and Craig would agree with me that this job that we have in Los Rios is worth all the work and all the pain, all the sacrifice you have to do to get the job. Get the job. It is worthwhile. This is a fantastic organization to work for.
Nice. And I thank you for all the work that you are doing right now for our district. If you're here at AR at some of our sister colleges, you're critical to the success of our students, to our programs, and to supporting our full-time faculty as well. They couldn't do their jobs without you. And so I want you to know that you are appreciated. Your work on curriculum, your work on all the different things you're involved in. So I thank you for that. And I'm going to end it now before I leave.
So the next part is Dean. Dean's going to be here for 1 more hour. So everyone please give Dean a hand.
All right, let me take you off here. I need my car. Now, I'm just going to go through parts of this only because we've gone through a lot of it. So this is a PowerPoint that I would normally do on my own. And, this is, what you got to do. You have to overcome a lot of obstacles to get that full-time job. And it's very important that you aren't intimidated by it, that you just go ahead and go for it and do it. And, part of it is getting into the top tier. In other words, you get an interview. That's going to be based upon, your cover letter and your resume, basically, and your application and resume. You have to make sure that that resume is well organized, that I don't have to search for information like crazy, that your cover letter tells me something about you that is of interest, that it relates to the job description. Make sure it covers all those bases, because you got to get the interview first, right? That's the important part. So your cover letter is going to be very important for that. And then also your application and resume. That's all going to be extremely important. If there, like I say, if one of the things that I always look for is if a person, let's say, is teaching or is in school and teaching, and all of a sudden for 10 years there's nothing about their work history. Okay? You better, in your cover letter or somewhere, tell me about that work history. What did you do in those 5 years or 10 years that I all of a sudden see something blank? Because if I see something blank, I am very concerned whether I'm going to see something blank once you get hired, right? That's a big concern. We don't want, the average faculty member is going to spend about 26 years in Los Rios. Average full-time faculty member, 26 years. So this is a long-term investment that we have in you in your career. But it's a very satisfactory one as well. But so when I see holes or I see a work history in which every 2 years you're doing something completely different in terms of your career, I'm going to be suspicious of that, right? With great concerns. If I have those, if you see those in your resume, you better explain what's going on and why. Okay? So that's extremely important for you to understand. Here, we've already talked about some of these issues. Screening criteria. Oh, preparing for the interview. So, here, again, what are the 3 most important things you want them to know about you? Okay? So, what are your 10 best skills? And how are they related to the job? Do you know what they are? Have you ever thought about it? Ever listed it? You know, what's the best thing about you? You should know those. Okay? Prepare for the most common interview questions. We talked about that already. And then the practice, practice, practice. Practice interviewing in front of colleagues or other faculty members, other people. Have them fire questions at you. Have them go at you. But that will get you prepared. That's going to get you prepared. So it's very important that you do that. And what you want to do is you want to think about the image you want to bring to the interview. This is really important. So this is the reason why you want to dress appropriately. Okay? This is the reason why you want to present yourself appropriately. You want to show that you are collegial, okay? That you're not combative, okay? That you are someone who we would want to work with, that you want to be a part of this organization. That's extremely important. So this is the reason why you want to set up some sort of image like this. Here, this is what you want to see in terms of the future faculty member in an interview, right? Someone who's bold, someone who's forward-looking, someone who can really impress the committee. Unfortunately, what happens way too often is that this is what the committee actually sees. And that's not something that you want to have come forward either. But they're going to look at you as this younger individual, someone who might not know everything or whatever. But you have to overcome those things, those barriers. So image is extremely important that you bring into the interview, right? And you have to cultivate that. Here's the image you don't want them to see. But that sometimes comes across. Sometimes we see this in not so, much more subtle ways, but we can see this. And that's something that you don't want to do either. So, here's how you see the committee, right? This is how you see the interview committee. A bunch of old fogies out there trying to evaluate you. But image, like I said, is very, very important. So you want to recognize that. And then by the time you get a full-time job, you're already ready to retire, right? That's what it seems like. All right. So, again, in the introductions, you want to make sure that you appear confident, congenial, professional. Eye contact is very important. Okay? You review those questions that will be provided to you here. Manage your time. Be direct, concise. Don't talk too much. Don't just run on with sentences. When you're done, you're done. Okay? Stay student focused. Remember, your job is about the students. It's not about so much you, it's about the students. Remember that.
I want to ask a question related to that, which is, and I'm sure it varies per department, but the tension between like my professional experience in outside of academia and bringing that to the classroom at the same time that I might still be engaged in that.
Right.
So I'm a writer, I'm writing, I'm publishing.
Right.
But I want to talk about that. But
that's an important part to bring in.
Okay, but I'm concerned that then that may be viewed as competitive against what my role is in the classroom. And the committee might say, oh, so you're spending all this time writing and developing your professional life. What about what are you doing in the classroom? So how do you deal with presenting that information?
So yes, that is bringing bringing your outside experience and incorporating it to some degree in the classroom. That's not 100% of what you do, but there's a part of it, and that's where you develop, let's say, student interest. And as students come to you, and then you can advise them of that. They want to be a writer, this is how they get into the business. All right? So it's a plus that you're bringing. And that's how you want to convey it, right? They were concerned about me because I had my PhD in psychology, I did research, I published over 30 articles by that time. And they were concerned that, hey, he's going to come here and then all he's going to do is leave. Well, I said, no, what I bring with my research experience and the things that I did at UC Davis is a very, very big plus for the students. And that's how I tried to turn that around, because I knew a lot of the faculty that were in the psychology department there, they all have this concern about me wanting to be truly a faculty member here at American College. Well, I've been here for 28 years, 29 now. So I made the commitment to be here. But again, you want to turn those other things as a positive, as something you bring extra beyond what other faculty can bring, right? Okay, so this was the first question that we talked about, right? We want to make sure it's going to be something like this. It's one of those two questions here. So again, it's going to be your education, teaching experience, personal experience. Strategically explain gaps in the resume, I talked about that already. Your relationships outside with the community, right? Same thing. Your relationships and what that brings into the classroom. Because this could lead to maybe jobs for a student, right? And then show your passion for the job. And the students. Remember, it is student focused. Another thing that they're always asked, they'll ask one question or so, or two questions, concerning your knowledge and your teaching skills. They want to know your knowledge in terms of the subject matter that we're interested in, but also your teaching skills. So these are going to be some of the kinds of questions that they might ask. They might ask about you, about your teaching skills and things. What would happen, let's say, if a student plagiarized their work? What would you do? Do you know the process to handle plagiarism in the classroom, that kind of thing? Or cheating, any of those. You should really take a look at those sorts of questions that are going to be out there. And sometimes what will happen is that in the, let's say in the teaching demo, here we talked about the teaching demo, you don't need to cram 2 hours of information into a 10-minute demo, okay? It's a 10-minute demo. Don't try to get everything. You can just effectively communicate a part of the entire subject that they might ask about. But this knowledge and preparation, sometimes what they will do is, and this will happen in some places that I know, they'll have someone role play as a disruptive student in the classroom while you're doing your teaching demo. Be prepared for that. That might happen. You know? They want to know how you're going to deal with that. We wanted to see what's your communication skills. What's your teaching style? That's what we're really looking for. That you have an effective way to communicate. You have a teaching style that's going to be effective. That is, you're someone that is comfortable in front of the classroom. Because that's what we need to know. And so you might want to demonstrate several different teaching skills while doing your demo. You might have let's say, a lecture portion, and then you might have a short portion, which is like a group activity portion, something like that. Or let's say that you have something that asks questions of the students, so that you get feedback from the students where they are. Okay, so that you're not just lecturing. Maybe you want to show that I have different ways to communicate with our students, with the students in the classroom. That's what you might want to do. You might want to bring diversity, like I said, into this. This is also extremely important. And then to practice it. Oftentimes what you'll get is a teaching demo is given to you about a week beforehand. You should go ahead and put that together and practice it like crazy. And put in all those things that we talked about, right? All these things. And you can do it. You can do it within that 10-minute time frame. Those that are willing to put in the time, they're going to do extremely well. If you're not willing, then then you take the chance of someone taking the job away from you, right? That's the whole thing. Make sure you understand the technology. A lot of times, things don't go right, and you need to know how the technology works. And sometimes your technology may be beyond what you really get, and then all of a sudden, you don't know how to use the chalkboard anymore. That's the problem. So it's about you. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Okay? What skills have you recently developed to become a better teacher in the classroom? What special skills do you have that are necessary for this position? What other interests or hobbies do you have that might be useful in your duties as a faculty member in a community college? Start thinking about those things, right? That's what you need to have down, really in the forefront of your brain. This is going to be automatic. And questions like these, they will oftentimes come about.
Question for you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I know the question about strength and weakness has always come up. And I've been told before when you're asked about your weakness, really don't give them a weakness. Give them a positive or flip it so that it's a strength.
You're right.
What really is kind of, what's your opinion on answering the weakness?
So one of them would be, this was a weakness of mine, but this is how I overcame it. Okay. So maybe my weakness would have been in online teaching. So I took the online courses here at AR. I developed my own online course just so I could overcome this barrier that I have. Something like that, you know?
Okay, so
Show how you overcame. Yeah.
If I may be authentic, but tell your own story. When I had my second round of interview, I just experienced something personal with some students. And so what I said was that I care too much about students. I take them with me, I carry them with me, and in a way that was true. That was something that I had to balance better. But I think the answer showed that I was constantly remembering doing what I could for my students. And there was a student who had a husband who didn't want her to go to school. And he actually kept her passport, driver's license in a safe. She could only go to school when he was out of town. So things like that. If you have something personal, feel free to share it because that makes you unique. And they will never forget you. But it has to be true and authentic, of course.
The other thing I always say is about the students, right? What do you know about our college or student population that's unique? We do have very clear demographics within the Los Rios district and within American River College. How would you, or how have you met the needs of students with disabilities in the classroom? Yeah. Have you done that? Have you done in your courses, what have you done in your courses to maximize student success and learning? How do you identify student needs and how do you meet them in and out of the classroom? Give me some specific examples. What experiences have you had with defining student learning outcomes and assessing them? Those sorts of things. Again, student learning outcomes is a big deal for a long period of time. But again, it's about the students. And a lot of times it's going to be, how do you manage the class? Do you have an orderly class? Can we tell that from the way you do your teaching demo and everything else? What do you do about iPhones in your classroom? Students using them or looking at them during your lecture or during that time in the classroom. How do you deal with people who have stress, anxiety, or depression, mental health issues, social issues such as poverty, homelessness, joblessness, those sorts of things. We meet this all the time in our classrooms, unfortunately. But it's a matter of, do you know if you encounter that, how to meet those challenges, help those students. So, you might get a question about classroom management at times. The student has plagiarized their term paper. What do you do? The student will not stop using their cell phone in class. What do you do? The student is extremely disruptive in class. What do you do? A student cheats on their exam, what do? These are things that you really should know, okay? Know what the process is for American College or CRC or wherever. Know what the process is. You should be aware of it. You shouldn't, a crisis shouldn't happen, and then you should go, oh, what do I do? You know, a crisis happens, this is what I'm supposed to do. You should know that, right? So that's what you want to do. And have that ready, because that might come up in an interview. Other part is shared governance. We want to make sure that you're not just a person, like I mentioned, is just going to come, teach your classes, and go home. We want you to be a part of the college, a part of the college process. So have you participated in the Department Academic Senate and Faculty Union? What about have you participated in accreditation or helped develop a strategic plan? Have you helped a colleague in one of their classes? Show that you're a college team player, that you're a good fit for the department, right? We don't want you, if you're an outsider of the department, we don't want that. So make sure that you look like you fit into the department, you're a part of the department, you're part of the fabric already. That's what we want to see. And so what college service have you done? What have you done in terms of college service? Make sure you understand those things that you have done, the things that you've been engaged in, and keep track of that so that you can talk about, oh, I've done this and this. And you can always embellish those things, but like I said, you got to know that this, yeah, you have participated in these activities in the college. Diversity. We already talked about diversity here, and that's going to be extremely important. Like we talked about cultural competency, you'll hear that term. So how have you utilized diversity to create an enriching environment in the classroom? Think about it. How can you use that to enrich your environment? What advantages or special challenges have you experienced with students of diverse backgrounds? What strategies have you used to help students who are not as academically prepared when they enroll in your class? So we have a lot of diversity in terms of academic preparation, right? That's the level of diversity that we have to deal with as well. So you have to understand diversity isn't just racial diversity. There's lots of different types of diversity, whether it's academic preparation, age, right, disabilities. There's lots of different levels of diversity that we have to deal with. Have you helped students when English was not their primary language? So you want to demonstrate your sensitivity to diversity. And it isn't just, like I said, the diversity question, it's throughout. In your teaching demo, and answers to other questions, you want to see, oh, this is how I can incorporate that. If you think about it, you'll be able to do that very easily. And once you get into it, you can develop that into the lingo of your just general way you answer questions. And then once you do that, then they will see, oh, this person was very sensitive to diversity. They knew about diversity. This is someone who didn't just answer the question about diversity, but they really felt it in their bones. That's what you want to do.
I'd like to add, you can do something as simple as when you come to the teaching demo, you can bring name tags, names for the fake students, the people who role play as your students, and give them names from different cultural backgrounds, from different languages, because again, that shows that our students are from different backgrounds. So instead of just all John and Mary, you can do Abdul, Svetlana, my name already, you can use it. It's not copyrighted. So things like that. That way, it's in your teaching demo as well. And I want to say this too. There was an event called Equity in Faculty Hiring that happened in the spring and also happened again on October 5th. I don't know if you are aware of that. There are terms now that we used to use, but now are considered deficit models, deficit vocabulary. So you might want to also make sure that you get up to date as to what are the terms that you can use and consider positive, and what are terms that traditionally have been used, but you don't want to use anymore because they're considered deficit. Yes?
Where can we find those?
email me, I have the list.
Oh, okay.
Because I went to the Full Scale Institute in during spring break, 2 days. And I also went to the one on October 5th, and I am very, and I think Dean is too, we are very, aware of equity and diversity, but for me, I was like, oh my goodness, I have to learn all these vocabulary words. I have to be careful because with research, with all kinds of things, now there are some, for example, disadvantaged. They don't want us to use that word anymore, that's deficient. So there are words that you want to make sure you use. There are words you want to make sure you don't use, even though traditionally they're okay and they have been used.
An opportunity to be a little bit ahead of the people that aren't within our system, because you're getting the emails right now that tell you what we're looking at, and an opportunity to go to the training that Ornate's talking about. And every opportunity you get, you should go to these type of trainings. This one, obviously, you're here, but we've had a lot of opportunities to go to training on contract, and a lot of things that'll be helpful to you in the interview process and going forward in the position that you're at now. The other thing to look at that we haven't really hit upon is the people that you put for your references. Make sure they're going to give you a good reference. I've called on the references, and I'm going, why is this person on your list? And give them a heads up if something that happened during the interview process. And I think we've discussed this already. You can tell them, hey, they might ask you a question about this. Do you remember when I did this? It's not a problem that I have, but I've seen it with others. False modesty, where you're very modest in terms of your accomplishments. You got to get over that. And you're going to have to practice that and how you can tie in things that you've done successfully or things that you can show your diversity within the interview. And I think some of the things that Dean's already talked about, it should be something that you're doing throughout the interview, not just a small portion of that particular question, but you should engage things to where you're able to explain what you've done, what your accomplishments are, and the future that you see for yourself and for the school. And a lot of that, if you're looking at the things that come out from the chancellor, how many people see in their email the chancellor's, you should read those? Thomas puts one out, the president puts one out constantly. We'll look through that. Go ahead.
There's also the YouTube videos that are coming out more and more. Thomas has a few, and then there's the ones that are being done at Ray Paul.
Yep.
Just saw one on with Chris Paget and Lori.
Racer.
I can't remember her last name. Anyway, it's about an hour-long YouTube video, but it kind of tells you what the goal of the school.
And you should be looking at those things, and you should be, that's a great point, Louis. It's the type of things that you should be looking at, and involvement in the campus. The last thing that I want in my department is somebody who's just going to come in and teach and leave. And when Dean's talking about somebody being around 28 years, that's somebody, when I'm in an interview and I'm looking for a full-time position, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to be with that person for 28 years, or I'm going to be thinking, wow, I can't wait to work with that person for 28 years. You've got to leave that flavor to where they want to work with you, you're presenting, and you have an opportunity right now as adjuncts to get involved. Be involved in the academic senate, be involved in union. Every opportunity, there's all kinds of involvement here. And take those opportunities to get to meet people, network, and they're going to be some good mentors for you. Somebody that can walk you through the process. A lot of what we've gone through today, you're going to forget. Some of you have taken some great notes, but the only way you're really going to really practice this is to get involved with somebody that does practice this, and they're going to help you through the process. I would never have gotten through this process without certain people that gave me an idea as to how I should present myself and some of the things that we're looking for at that time. And some of the things they told me, I don't see that, but that's what you want. You want somebody who's going to be honest with you and practice, practice, practice. I think what Dean's made a point to tell you here, the more you practice on the things that you know, when the things that you don't know, you'll have an opportunity to think it through, and you won't be a deer in the headlights for every question. Some of them you'll have down. And once you get 2 or 3, you've hit out of the park, your confidence level goes up, and the way that you're going to do the interview is just going to change it. I haven't done hundreds like Lisa, but I've done a lot of interviewing here. And I can tell you, pretty much knowing the individuals, the ones that are gonna freeze, and the ones that are gonna present themselves well. And a lot of the ones presenting themselves well, have just done a lot of interviewing. So it doesn't hurt to do a lot of interviewing, and you'll get better as you interview. I think we were talking about somebody that interviewed 6 times, and finally they worked their way through the process. That's a good thing, but you gotta get out there and make it happen. The only thing you regret are the things that you don't do. Very seldom do you regret the things that you've done if you do it with the right intentions. That makes sense?
I'd like to add one small thing. Choose your references very carefully. I had to do reference checks, not I had to volunteer to do reference checks in the last hiring in the spring. And I think not all references are created equal. There are people who just answer the questions and they don't elaborate, they don't give examples. There are people who give a lot of examples to support the candidate. So choose your references really, really, really carefully. Make sure they have a lot to say about you. Make sure there's someone who would explain and elaborate. They would just say yes, no.
I'll piggyback on that because I just did a bunch of reference checks last time. And I think there's a presumption that when you call someone for a reference and they give a less than enthusiastic reference, that there may be an issue, but you don't go in thinking that, but it could be. And so if you get 3 references like that from a person, the other underlying suggestion is that's the best they got. So if the best they got are mediocre, because if I have 4 references, I only need to give you 2 or 3, I'm not going to give you my worst 2 or 3, I'm going to give you my best 2 or 3. So if their best is a guy or a lady or who's kind of wishy-washy on the phone, that's really not a good sign. I mean, so I think Ornita's correct. It's like the second or third time I've heard that, is that, in other words, you're not just giving a name who can vouch for the fact that yes, you worked there. You want somebody who says, I sure hope she gets the job because she's really great, that type of person. If you don't have that type of person, find somebody else, make a new friend, whatever you got to do.
When do you call the references? Is it after first interview?
Right after the first interview.
Okay, those 5
Look,
candidates?
hopefully you're in that top 3.
Okay.
If you're in that top 3, that's when you should know, you should call them for sure. After the interview, like I said, make the evaluation of what went well, what didn't, and then anticipation of how to prepare for the second interview. Hopefully you get the second interview, and you make sure you call those references as well.
In the initial interview, we have to answer questions the same way for every candidate, and we can't deviate. On the references, there's some deviation, and when you get to the second interview, they can go just about any place, and they can ask you questions and follow-up questions, which is really important. So the first step that let's go back even further. When you put the application in, if your application doesn't state what you need it to state, you're not going to get to the first step, the first interview. And then when you're doing the first interview, if you can't present yourself, and then take the opportunities with the first question, the last question, and then develop a theme throughout that's positive, then you're not going to go to the second interview. Then when you get to the second interview, before that we're going to do references, and then your references are going to speak for you. And like I initially said, you want to get the right people. I think it's in the back here, what he was telling you is right. Make sure it's the right people that are going to present you the way that you need to be presented, or the reality. And then you get to the final interview. And each step along the way, we get more definitive in terms of what we're looking for. But I've seen also, when we've done the first section, we get to that part where it says anything else we'd like to tell the committee. There's been times I think, you know what, that's what we need. Because they did such a great job of selling themselves, talking about where they see the future of our department, and some of the things that they've trained for that to get to our future. And they've sold us to a point that we're going afterwards, you know, wow, that would be great to have somebody that's into electronics that understands how the new electric vehicles work. And they've had the training. So we sort of make some changes at that point when we're having our discussions. On our discussions, we do the voting, then we discuss, and I think it was Orny who was talking about where something comes up and maybe they didn't hear it because they were talking, and then you sort of sway the other people, then you do another round of voting. And it can change. I've seen where we've changed where I thought, okay, this one's a definite, and then we have our discussion, and then they're the top 3. And then there's been times too where we just don't feel that we found what we need, and we go out again. And when we go out again, that means we go out again and we interview again. We've interviewed some of the same people because they hit the criteria. Remember, we're looking for the criteria and the way we go, and they come back and they do a much better job. It's like it's a different person because they've had some skill and some experience. And that's where it comes to apply. Get the experience, learn the skill sets. If you get to any one of these rounds, you should congratulate yourself because you're already making the right efforts to get to that point. But as you advance, a lot of that's going to come from mentoring and having people to help you that have been through the process. You all knew full-timers at your adjuncts here, is that right? And you have people who work with you very closely. Work with them and have them tell how they went through the process. When I was going through this process, and this almost 15 years ago now, well, I heard everybody's story. I asked everybody, how did you do it? What was the process? And I never had anybody say, hey, I don't want to tell you. Sometimes I had to say, okay, I got it, because they really want to tell you the whole process. But that's good, because you start to learn from what other people, what they feel their mistakes are, or how they could have improved through the process. Does that make sense?
So like we said, you have your last question, that's pretty standard. Make sure that you give the appropriate kind of answer to that. Like I said, these are ones that I've heard. Is this a full-time or part-time job? How much does this job pay? What classes will I be teaching? How many classes do I need to teach? Can I do 100% online teaching? Those are all bad. Those are bad questions at the end. Please don't ask them. Is there anything else that you need to know? Is there anything that I can clarify? Those sorts of things. That would be better. Oftentimes, what happens is that we're evaluating, we're writing things down, and we're just going as busy as a bee trying to do that. And oftentimes it just doesn't look like we're interacting with you at all. You go, yeah, they're not laughing at my jokes that I tell. You're not interacting like a normal student class would. Well, that's the truth. And this is what it may feel like, right? And all of a sudden, there's all dead people out there. No, that's not true. We're just trying to go through and process everything. And then once the interview is over, like I said, you begin all right, and then afterwards you feel like you've been through the ringer, right? That's when it's over. But again, like I said, that's the time where you need to do that. You need to critique yourself. What went well, what didn't go well, contact your references, and then at the very end I say, write a letter thanking them for the interview. So some people do that, and if your interviews went really, really well, this is icing on the cake, where you just go ahead and you write a just thank you letter for them and their time that they took to do the interview. So, those are the main points. Sure, I've got others that are here, but I don't think I need to go through those, because we've been through them already. We've been through the writing sample, second interview. Excellent, work is done.
I want to say this. In the spring, when I was on a hiring committee, we actually were told not to pay attention to thank you emails. I think it might just be every committee is different, but I guess it doesn't hurt to write a thank you email. And so some people were very savvy. I serve as an equity rep. Equity representative, so I serve on a lot of hiring committees outside of ESL. I would say in the last 18 years, I probably served on at least 20 committees, 20 hiring committees, and I think everyone is different, every committee is different, but definitely, it doesn't hurt to write a thank you note, like being showed to you. Just know that sometimes committee members are instructed not to pay attention to those emails. So if you don't hear back from them, it's not that they don't appreciate your thank you note. It's just that they can't respond.
It makes an impression, and I will tell you, everyone that has done that, it does make an impression. Because what you want to do is you want to lift yourself above the others, right? Other interviews. So this helps to raise that. And the people that do this well, they don't send an email, they send an actual personal written card. Yeah.
I would add to that get an email.
Yeah.
Send an email, that's probably worse than nothing. I think it's like,
It's
it's
a
how much the
personal-
job means to me. Shoot out with it, you know.
Although it's
I mean,
quick,
I'll-
Mark,
what's
because,
that?
you know, if you send a card, it takes time.
That's what I'm saying. If you send the card, that shows a lot more commitment. If you just send an email, you're better off sending nothing.
But by the time the card gets to them, you have to get, you know, all the information, the names and all that. By the time the card gets to them, the second round of interview has already been, you know,
Valid point,
determined.
yeah.
Bill, you know, you already know who the VPI is, the department chair. You'll know some of the facts.
Besides, you already brought their names in. Abdul was one of them, I remember.
Yeah, you already know who some of them are. So those that you know, or if you can get them, then you put a card, a physical card in their mailbox. That's what you do.
One question I remember from a previous conference like this was, or one issue was, you could put your phone on the table and each question was timed. About how many minutes should you spend on each question in an interview? Isn't it
And
something
depends
like
on the question. So 5 to 10 minutes.
5 or 10 minutes? So, yeah.
So you have
it's
50 minutes.
A trick.
There's 10 questions, so you got about 5 minutes
Yeah, yeah.
here or there.
So you could put your phone on the table and,
That's why you want to rehearse, because
yeah.
when you rehearse, you can get a lot more information in than if you're just trying to think as you go along.
Mhm.
Not all questions are created equal, I would say. So you might want to make sure that you infuse diversity and equity into every answer. Because that is something that, you know, that's been talked about, discussed. There's a huge effort. Like I said, during spring break, the district had had some administrators, faculty union members, and a few classified staff, but mostly faculty representatives attend 2 days of the Institute on Equity in Faculty Hiring. And we just had another one on October 5th. I think that's a huge thing. Infuse it in every answer if you can. Do it directly and indirectly, subtly, and obviously all the time.
I say the most impressive interview I've ever been in is for an administrator, actually. And he was done with the interview in 40 minutes, inside of 40 minutes. But every answer he had, it was so specific, so well presented. There wasn't a lot of extra words or anything. It was amazing. And that 40 minutes flew by, but he answered every question in such a great way. It was amazing, amazing. So again, you don't have to fill up all the time, right? Make sure that you answer it well, and you're thorough, and when you're done, you're done. Go on to the next one.
So about 4 years ago, I interviewed for a position that my department chair and I were up for. My first interview, I went in, I practiced my PowerPoint, left the flash drive in my classroom. I had my handouts, and then, so I had the handouts, we did that. Went to, they asked me a simple question on a subject I had just taught that morning, froze on it. Then I stopped and, oh, hold on, let me try a different approach. Froze on that one too. Then went through the PowerPoint, just handed out my notes, and then kind of just kept going. We're having a good time with it, just laughing. I mean, things happen.
Yeah.
Made it to the third round. And then finally, just after the second round with the VP of Instruction, the president, and my dean, it was just me with my dean, and then just that one was very informal. Okay, how do you feel? What do you think of this, this, and this? And then from there, she made a decision.
Right.
That modesty thing that Craig was talking about, I think that killed me.
Yeah, yeah.
It came down to one question that I believe is who you think is best qualified. At that point, my department chair he helped build the program. He had numerous classes under his belt. I was in my first class. So my answer was him, because it made sense. He had the experience. He had the similar skill set that I did at that time. But how could I say myself in my mind? I don't regret it. That's what I did.
Yeah.
And I'm still here.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Yeah, but you've been involved with a lot since then, and you've taken and recovered from it, and you've built forward, and that's all you can do. And it was a great learning experience, I would think.
It's fun. Every time I still see people in my interview panel, they smile at me. You have to just, it happened, get over it, move forward.
Absolutely.
And I think this is something that so many people have talked about, including part-time and full-time faculty members of known, and maybe Dean and Greg would agree. If you apply 4 times and you still don't get a full-time position, it is very hard not to feel bitter. But please remember what Lisa and Dean said. You know, Lisa said if you get to the interview, that means something. It depends on who is in the pool, and I think Dean said this many times that you want to show that you can collaborate with the department, you want to show that you want to work with the department. So it doesn't help to be very bitter and to be very snarky or to show that you are resentful, because that will just make it worse. And I've seen this, I've heard things off the record, and I just wish I could tell certain faculty members, you know, in the Russian saying, it is you get more flies with honey. So try to prepare a lot of honey with you and try to be positive, even if you don't get, you know, the first job you apply for, the second job you apply for. I know someone who's been great and has been tenured for 18 years, and she applied, I think, 4 times before she got this full-time position. Other questions? Dean is still here. Yeah. Other questions, anything you would like to have Dean and Greg or anyone else clarify? Thank you for coming. If you didn't get a list of upcoming events, I'm going to put them in the back. We also have LRCFT. We also have LRCFT stylus and ball pens, 2-in-1. Feel free to grab one. And please feel free to grab some egg rolls and cookies. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Dean.